I've never been much of a believer in the supernatural before. I don't have nerves of steel. Sudden loud noises make me flinch just as much as the average person. And I won't lie and say there aren't nights where I sleep in my parents' room and leave the nightlight on after a particularly disturbing horror film. But I've never actively bought any outlandish stories people tell me about ghosts or demons, nor am I an overtly religious person that goes to mass every Sunday. But unlike me, my family has always been superstitious. Maybe it's because when I was younger, our whole extended family lived with my maternal grandmother, who had migrated from the province to the big city and carried all their weird beliefs with her to teach to her children. We were, and still are, a pretty tight-knit family, and we adored, respected, and followed our elders to a T. There's a lot to be critiqued about that, I know, but that's just how the way things are in our culture, and sure, there will always be some things that would cause tension because of the generational gap in progressive ideals, but isn't that true for every family? Okay, I'm straying away from the point. All I'm saying is, my family, and I mean almost every single member, is superstitious because of that. It always felt a little silly hearing stuff around the house like, did you stop by somewhere else before going home? After someone comes home from a wake or so, a man is going to visit you when someone knocks a fork off the table during dinner. But it made them feel at ease, and honestly, most of them weren't even that big of an inconvenience, so I did them anyway. After this incident, I feel as if that skepticism was hurled out the window. To set the scene, my family moved out of my grandmother's house a few years ago and now lives in a one-floor, two-bedroom apartment in my father's childhood neighborhood. We're not exactly well off, so the only unit we could afford had our living room, kitchen, and dining room table pretty much combined into one space. The hybrid room connects to a hallway that diverts off to the two cramped bedrooms, one that my two little brothers and I share, and one that my parents share, and leads to the tiny bathroom right at the back of the house. It's a quaint little place. I've never been one for extravagance, and we all agreed that maybe a bigger house would have been much lonelier after moving out from a place where 15 people lived together for the first time. One of the better parts of the bargain we got, however, was our very own parking garage. It was nothing fancy, just a vacant space in front of our door with a metal gate to keep people out. It's an extra space to move around, and because my family can't afford a car, we just use it to sun-dry our laundry and exercise, making the tiny space of the house feel a little freer. My family knew the landlord apparently. She and my father had used to be playmates when they were little, so she'd asked for a favor from us in exchange for lowering our rent. There's been a couple of theft incidents in the neighborhood, and since we were the apartment nearest the street corner, she wanted to place a surveillance camera in our garage to see if any people were coming and leaving the street. All we had to do was house a single monitor smack dab in the middle of our living room and never turn it off. There didn't seem like any downsides to it, and it's an extra security measure for us, which my father is always a fan of. He's a little paranoid if it's not obvious. At the time, I was a college student swamped with working on my final thesis to graduate. As much as I wanted to go out with them and have a couple of hours of relaxation, time was not in my favor. I'd promised to make it up to them after I graduate, and they'd reluctantly agreed, albeit unhappily. Even if I'm technically already an adult, they're always worried about leaving me alone at home, just in case an emergency happens. Like I said, paranoid. My parents gave me the usual spiel: lock the door, close the windows, and draw the blinds. If you're going to have some food delivered, if you're too lazy to cook, pay online and let the driver leave it at the gate. Don't open the gate for anyone who comes calling, even if it's them, since they always take 2 spare keys with them. Having heard this a million times before, I'd rolled my eyes and agreed. When they'd set off around dusk, I settled into the grueling task of making revisions my thesis advisor had noted, which were, unfortunately, a fuck ton of them. I crossed my feet on the couch, hunched over, and began typing. I lost myself in my work. I didn't realize how long I'd been working on it until my eyes strayed toward the digital clock of my laptop, and I realized 2 hours had passed. My back ached and my stomach was rumbling, but I didn't feel like cooking or placing an order for delivery yet, especially since I was almost done editing the 3rd chapter. A knock sounded. Puid po ba akong pumasok, a voice asked out of the blue, sounding right outside the front door. It's in my native language, which means may I come inside in English. My head was still swimming from all the revisions I'd been doing, my eyesight a little hazy from staring at a laptop screen for so long that I didn't immediately register that something was wrong. I opened my mouth to respond when my brain finally, finally caught up with the situation, and I froze. "Hello, Pooh. Puid po ba kong pumasok," they said again with another couple of knocks. The voice was a young woman's, soft and sweet, asking politely if she could come into the house. It sounded so amicable and kind, and that's probably why I didn't notice the puzzle pieces adding up. My eyes flew to the surveillance footage blaring on the monitor. My blood chilled. Our gate was still closed, still wrapped with a metal chain and sealed with the fancy steel lock my dad made a point to buy, despite our limited budget, saying its security was worth the price tag. And the place where the voice was coming from was empty. No one, at least not anyone the camera could see, was standing outside our door. The knocking grew louder. Puid po ba kong pumasok. Dimly, I recalled that one little quirk my grandmother always had right before she entered a room, especially a house. She would knock on wood and go, "Tau po," before she said anything else. The phrase translates roughly in English as "I'm a human." I've always thought of it as stupid. Even as a child, I always reasoned that obviously you're a human, so there's no need to announce it. But people, every single time they visited, would for some reason say that exact phrase with a questioning look on their faces before they entered a building. When I asked about it, my grandmother had plopped me in her lap and explained that way back in the old days, before there were all these devices to keep people safe and secure, all our ancient ancestors had were doors to keep them safe from predators. The barrier would keep them safe from anything that wasn't human, like wild animals, but sometimes they would still hear knocking and scratching from the outside, and they could never be too sure if it was because a neighbor had come knocking, or if it was a feral animal making it and attack them if it was ever opened. The greeting became a reassurance, my grandmother had said, that whoever was outside would not harm them. "Puid po ba kong pumasok," the voice said again, in that high, sickly sweet tone that made me tremble. I didn't realize how often people used that greeting until it was suspiciously, glaringly missing. It felt absolutely wrong. My stomach sunk to my feet. The knocks that came after that were loud, harsh, and demanding. "Puid po ba kong pumasok." The voice became harder. The words were still polite, but I could hear it was getting agitated, angrier, and there was still no one standing outside the front door. Cold sweat ran down my back. I was shaking, and I could feel the sting of tears making their way out of my eyes. My chest was tight, and my throat was closing, but I clamped my hand on the top of my mouth and forced myself not to make a sound. I curled into a ball on the couch, eyes peeled on that fucking footage. From the corner of my eye, I think I see shadows of something moving from the shut curtains, but still, nothing on that footage. I don't know what I was thinking at the time. That maybe if I didn't answer, didn't confirm that there was a person on the other side of the door inside the house, it would give up and leave? I don't know. I'm not sure why I thought that would work. But fear held me in place with a vise-like grip, and I just watched. Bang, 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 bang. The knocks weren't just knocks anymore. It sounded as though someone was pounding both their fists against the door. I could hear the wood rattle, the door fighting against the hinges. I could hear the metal creak, and my stomach churned violently, but I couldn't move. Couldn't make myself bolt to the bedroom or bathroom to hide. I felt as though any movement I made would make it angrier, even though logically it couldn't possibly see me. But logic had been thrown out the fucking window the moment the knocking started. "Puid po ba kong pumasok," the voice screamed, a terrifying high-pitched screech that burned into my eardrums. I've never been a religious person, but in that moment I prayed. I prayed that if God existed, to please not let me die in my own fucking house before I even graduate college. I prayed that my parents would miraculously come home and save me. I prayed that they didn't, and that they wouldn't get hurt by the thing trying to force its way inside. I kept praying and praying and praying and praying and praying until I didn't know what the hell I was praying for. Then suddenly it stopped. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I waited, frozen, helpless. For a few glorious seconds I thought it was over. Bang, bang, bang. The door shuddered, and I could hear the wood of the door splinter. It was going to get in. It was going to get in. I forced my body to move. I bolted for the bedroom, slammed it shut, locked it, and heaped on whatever heavy thing I could find against it before scrambling to the very back of the room. Silence. The knocking on the front door stopped. And then it happened. A soft tapping behind the curtain on the bedroom window. No voice followed, but I was sure it was knocking. A deliberate pattern, knuckles against glass. Tap, tap, tap. Quiet, but insistent. I don't know why, but I had no doubt about it. This was the same thing that was knocking on the front door. Tap, tap, tap. I buried myself under my blankets and covered my ears, begging for it to stop. It didn't. Mes. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't know how long I was under there, listening to that knocking that never seemed to end. But my parents found me in my room, a few hours later, crying my eyes out. I don't remember the details of what happened afterward, really. I don't know how long it took for them to calm me down, only that it took a while. I don't know if I even managed to tell them what happened properly, but in whatever version they managed to understand, they looked deeply disturbed, and they didn't even question it, which I'll forever be thankful for. They let me and my little brothers sleep in their room for the rest of the month. I started taking medicine to help me drift off because of how anxious I'd gotten since then. And I've never stayed home alone since. I don't think I'll ever be able to again, honestly. But there's one more thing that I'll never forget. What they'd told me afterwards still makes a chill seep its way into my bones and makes my throat close up whenever I think about it. Right before they'd found me sobbing hysterically, my parents were pissed, ready to chew me out for being so reckless. Because when they tried to put their key in the doorknob, they didn't hear its telltale click. I'd accidentally left the front door unlocked.